All right, welcome guys. Thank you for clicking play. I appreciate you. All right, so I'm gonna try to say this without laughing, without smiling. Trying to be serious. Okay. A lesbian bar was closed because it wasn't woke enough. Oh, okay. All right, so Matt Walsh is gonna break this joint down. And of course, this is my very first time being introduced to it. So let's check it out together. That's cool. Ah.
Well, up until today, my favorite story out of the leftist dystopia of Portland happened a few years ago. As reported by Andy Ngo at the time, a professional equity activist named Lillian complained about the racism she experienced at a bakery called Back to Eden Bakery. And Lillian, if you remember this story, she said that she had been refused service by the two employees on staff. And the only logical explanation for this refusal, of course, was that the employees were vicious, out in the open, anti-black racists who just so happened to work in downtown Portland. After all, why else would anyone refuse service to a black woman? I mean, why else would these two employees actually tell the woman to leave without allowing her to purchase any baked goods? That's what they said to her. They said, leave.
Wow.
The owner of the bakery couldn't imagine any other reason, so she immediately fired both of the transgressors, threw them under the bus publicly, and she also promised to hire black women and members of the, quote, LGBTQ POC community to replace the two Klansmen that she had on her staff. Further, the owner...
What? Did the owner even investigate to make sure that her co-workers were wrong before just giving in to the people who had a gripe? So, because sometimes we do that. And when I say we, I try to include myself. I know that I won't do that BS just to say, oh, just to shut you guys up and to show that I want to be on the right side of history. I'm going to go ahead and fire all of my employees because you're right and we're wrong. No, I think that's some sucker stuff. Like, did they back up their employees?
Pledged to donate 10% of their sales to a charity that bails criminals out of jail. And all of this was done, but of course, it was not nearly enough to assuage the hurt and pain and anguish suffered by Lillian.
Wow.
But it was a start anyway. Oh, one note that might be relevant here. Lillian came to the bakery after it was closed. So she walked in 6 minutes after closing and demanded to be served. And they refused on the basis that they were no longer open. But that excuse wouldn't fly. The bakery should have checked with Lillian personally before deciding to close that evening.
Hold up, if they were closed and someone came in there after they were closed, and the employees said, no, we're not serving you. The employees were in the right. They didn't do anything wrong.
Indeed, they should have polled every black woman in the city to see when they should close and open. And if any black woman desires a muffin at any time of day or night and is not able to procure it immediately for low cost or no cost, then she is the victim of racism, and whatever bakery is nearest to her while she is suffering this muffin deprivation is guilty of committing a hate crime against her.
Muffin deprivation.
This just makes sense. I mean, the bakery agreed that it made sense. Overall, it was a great Portland story. My favorite until this week, anyway. Libs of TikTok on her site, libsoftiktok.com, has a story, I think, even better than a bakery being accused of racism for not serving a black woman after they already closed. Apparently, this is what the story is. After much fanfare and celebration, a lesbian bar opened this month in Portland called Doc Marie's. And there had surprisingly not been a lesbian bar in Portland, so this was seen as a significant and important event. And opening day was a huge success, lines around the block waiting to get in. A week later, the place was closed. And the reason is pretty hilarious. Reading now from the report, it says, Doc Marie's is a lesbian bar that opened on July 1st of this year with the hope of bringing more inclusivity to the city of Portland. But just 1 week after their grand opening, they were forced to shut down because of complaints that the bar was not a safe space. The crowd on opening day was huge. One woman said that the line for entry on opening day was wrapped around the block with literally 200 lesbians waiting to get in. But the excitement about a new progressive hangout...
200 lesbians. I'm not laughing at 200 lesbians. I don't think that 200 lesbians is hilarious. I just think that it's wild that the only people that came to support this movement was a bunch of lesbians. Nobody... Okay, I'm ridiculous, man. I need to grow up. I know.
Dissipated quickly. Within days, Doc Marie's found itself on the receiving end of accusations of not being inclusive enough for trans people and people of color. Despite mask mandates being lifted in Portland, patrons accused the bar of not implementing enough COVID safety measures. Patrons also claimed that Doc Marie's had culturally appropriative art on the walls. That's just some of it. It gets worse. A TikToker who goes by the handle Danger Dallas and identifies herself as a queer stripper who uses they, them pronouns, followed the Doc Marie's case closely as you would expect, and provided a thorough outline of some of the sins the lesbian bar committed in just a week of being open. Let's listen to that.
Payroll systems that are not paying people correctly, discrepancies in salaries, dirty water leaking onto the floor, and the owner enabling racist behavior. So the real reason why Doc Marie's is closed is because when the workers brought these concerns to the ownership the next day after opening day, the ownership did not meet the concerns with any sort of plan of action, and the unsatisfactory response caused the managers to quit their jobs immediately. The Workers Collective goes on to assure us that protecting Black and Brown LGBTQ plus folks and building an actively anti-racist space is their top priority, that they are committed to ongoing racial bias training and will continue to educate ourselves in order to actively foster a safe environment while upholding a zero policy towards racism.
So we take from that the entire staff made a list of demands, and because those demands were not met right on the spot, they all quit a day after the place opened. Back to the Libs of TikTok report, it says, employees of Doc Marie's created an Instagram page to echo these concerns. They claim that the owners weren't proactive enough in creating a safe space and accused the owners of racism. The employees also demanded that the bar host free opportunities for education for the community. Eventually, the employees demanded the owners relinquish ownership of the bar and hand the business over to them. This all happened in like a day of being open, I have to remind you. The owners were given a 24-hour deadline to adhere to the ludicrous demands. Just 5 days after opening, the bar announced on July 6th they had to close temporarily in order to address the cries from the woke mob for a safe and inclusive space. And now the bar is closed with no immediate plans to reopen. They say only that they are working on a plan to become proud and inclusive.
Okay, first of all, there's a whole bunch of red tape to go through in order to open up a bar. It's a whole bunch of money you have to spend. There's a whole bunch of certifications you have to have. And you're meaning to tell me that you're going to throw all of that away just so you can be included? So you won't, what? Even when you weren't wrong in the first place? What am I missing here? What am I missing here? Because are we that sensitive? Are we that pressed to be on the right side of history? This is where it's going, folks. You got to be on the right side, or you're not doing anything at all. I think that's BS, man. That's complete BS.
Meanwhile, their employees, or former employees, I guess, still insist that the business they chose to work for committed an unforgivable violation by being a business. They demand that the business should not be a business at all. It should have no ownership. It should provide free services.
What?
And its primary goal should be racial equity. Now, as a greedy capitalist, I would have thought that a business's primary goal is to turn a profit.
Money. Absolutely.
So that it remains in business. But that's just not the way things are done in Portland.
What?
And the problem only compounds for Doc Marie's because they're closed. They closed so as to stop inflicting whatever unspecified trauma on the Black and trans community. But as the bakery learned a few years ago, you're also inflicting trauma by being closed. See, this is the trouble with being a Black or trans person in Portland. Literally, no matter what anyone else does, they are always victimizing you. And the bigger problem for being not Black or trans in Portland is that literally no matter what you do, you're always victimizing someone in one of those groups. Now, I, of course, am not at all interested in defending the Portland lesbian bar from the woke mob. I am interested instead in standing on the sidelines and just snickering about the whole thing because it's funny, and also in observing and studying this self-cannibalizing victimhood orgy to see what we can learn from it.
Self-cannibalizing victimhood orgy. I mean, essentially, that's what you're buying into. If you're someone who subscribes to this right here, not to the channel, but to the mob's way of thinking, and ownership of the bar's way of thinking, because they're like, oh, you yelled so loud that we finally understand. Our business is not supposed to make money. It's supposed to make the world better. You're right. We would do our part. That's ridiculous, man. I know that's the word of the day, ridiculous, but that's exactly what this story is.
And as far as I can tell, the big and also kind of encouraging takeaway is that leftism is inherently weak and vulnerable. It has institutional power and so it controls the culture, but considered on its own, we see that it's prone to dissension, mutiny, paralysis. This is just one example of the left eating itself. Every day provides new ones. And this happens because leftism is a fundamentally self-focused, self-obsessed ideology. It discourages any real unity, any real rallying around a central cause, because everyone's central cause is themselves. All alliances are formed only temporarily for as long as each person individually feels served by it. Nobody is looking out towards anything transcendent, anything beyond themselves. It's hard for them to march in the same direction together for very long because they're all staring not ahead, but back into themselves, into their egos, up their own asses, basically. The only universal code they recognize is the ever-fluctuating, ever-changing, ever more complicated victimhood hierarchy, a system that breeds competition as each group vies for ultimate victim status. And each individual within each group competes not only with the other groups, but with members of their own group.
And everybody's just competing to see which group is felt sorry for the most, and which group will majority of Americans go out of their way to protect and take up for, even when they don't need that extra protection. People are making up issues when in a world where there's more than enough issues to go around. And it makes absolutely no sense.
Intersectional splinter factions are constantly formed as people look to marginalize themselves more and more, because in their inverted upside down world, to be on the margins is to be in power. It is fortunate for the left, tragic for the rest of us, that this final plunge into self-defeating, self-cannibalizing madness happened after they'd already gained control of every institution. If it had happened before, they never would have had this success. This is what creates the ironic situation where the far left runs the most powerful cultural institutions in the country, but they can't even manage to keep a lesbian bar in Portland open for more than a week. And still, even with their institutional power, this madness makes them vulnerable. It makes them beatable. And sometimes, it even makes them very funny to watch. And so, though I am not the one who decided to cancel them, that is nonetheless why Doc Marie's, the lesbian bar in Portland, is today canceled.
All right, Doc Marie's. That's ridiculous. It's dumb as hell, and I will be laughing as well, because I think it's ridiculous, man. Clearly, I said that 18 times. But I want to know what y'all got to say about this in the comments below. And if you have yet to hit that subscribe button, please make sure you do so on your way out the door. Once again, guys, I'm Van, and now we are all the LFR family. And I look forward to seeing you on the next video, and hopefully inside the Patreon as well. LFR. I probably it's too many letters. That's with the community that we're talking about, and everyone's battling against, or battling to protect, or battling not to offend. It just caught me when I was saying now we are all the LFR family. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video, hopefully inside the Patreon as well. Y'all have been amazing per usual. Love y'all.